Good evening, everyone. Greetings and welcome to our bi-monthly news crossover with one of the more informative programs in left media, Left Reckoning. We have done cross streams with the Left Reckoning fellas before, but we decided it's always so much fun and informative that we needed to make it a regular occurrence. Please note that there are links in the description for those of you that are unfamiliar with our channel, this is Revolution, and Left Reckoning. So please hit like, definitely subscribe to both channels. And if you feel inclined and have the means, please consider becoming a patron. Both of us offer exclusive content to our patrons, and it helps us to remain independent. More importantly, prevents us from selling. Let me remind everyone watching that after we finish here, we'll be heading out to our patron-only champagne room, where we'll be joined by our good friend and journalist for a Latin American rundown. What's going on in Chile, Argentina, Peru. We're taking your questions as well. In order to take part in this conversation, please go to patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. You will also find links in the description as well as in the chat. Now that is all out of the way, please let me allow you to introduce you to my co-host, my homie, my dog, the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
Oh, you guys can't hear me? You having a problem hearing me?
I can hear you. Just
it sounds a little far away.
Right. I think you went black.
Well, what happens is all you guys have so much access to this. You keep logging me out of my own settings. So that is you guys' fault.
There you go.
That makes sense.
And it is extremely frustrating. So, and everything's fine, considering the horrible accident that happened last Tuesday during the champagne room.
Last Tuesday? That was this Tuesday.
Was it whatever day it was? That's
don't
how
blame
hard
you for not remembering. Yep.
the fall was so bad that I don't even remember what day it is. Now everything sounds fine, right? Let's bring in the Left Reckoning boys. Coming all the way live from hot-ass Texas. He is everyone's favorite Texas lawman, David Griscom. How's it going, fellas? And he is from one of my favorite states in the Midwest, West, but northwest of the mid. Too far to be east, but too east to be west. Madlack.
Hello, yes. I'm from where the West begins.
Where the West begins.
You know what it is, though, is everyone's too tied to borders, and we should be back with geography. And basically, the West starts at the Missouri and Mississippi, in my opinion. And everything between the Missouri and the Ohio rivers, that's the Midwest. And
what size is that blunt you're smoking there, Matt?
Well, we have one of our hosts on Saturday is from Ohio, and he refers to Ohio as the Midwest.
Absolutely.
And you know, us Californians assume everything that is in the Eastern time zone is the East Coast. So North Carolina, Ohio. Once you pass that magical line, that's just the East Coast. Vermont, Michigan, it's all the same.
Terrible to all of our listeners out there.
To all of our listeners out there, I do want to remind everyone that October 23rd, the faces that you guys see here on this screen are all going to be live Teragram Ballroom, October 23rd. We will be live. Give them a revolution. Left Reckoning. This is Revolution. Give them an argument with special guests, including Nando Vila, Daniel Bessner, Derek Vaughn. I almost said just Varn. Just come just to call Varn Sean King. Like, I think it's worth it. To his face, just say he looks like Sean King. Like, that right there is worth the ticket alone. So I'm excited. We had a whole talk about what we're going to talk about. It's behind the scenes.
It's going to be fun. And if I can make a little personal plug, y'all, you know, I turned 30 on October 24th. It'd be really great to celebrate my 30th birthday with a whole bunch of y'all. So please consider joining us in Los Angeles. I mean, I'll just speak from experience. We loved all of our live shows that we did with TMBS, but Los Angeles was definitely the most hoot and hollering show that we ever did. So I'd like to recreate that in some aspect if we could.
Before I forget, I am a horrible show host. It could be because I'm a man, and I thought this was going to be our man show-ish thing.
The man.
But the resident female / voice of reason is reminding me that I haven't introduced the entire panel. Please welcome the faceless voice of reason. That is a real person. They are not an AI. The irony is Pascal is an AI. Please welcome M. Toussaint.
AI has been always interesting.
Look at that. Like on his feet, this guy.
That was pretty
Hello,
good.
hello.
That was good. No, AI is in you were created. Me, Teray, and Cedric Johnson created you in a lab. In an AI lab.
Wow. Considering that I'm older than all three of you, that's pretty scary.
Well, that was part of the creation. We had to make you crotchety.
Wow. It works. It works.
Oh, everyone's like, I'm too sorry. See, when I come at you, when I
There's a
come at
couple
you,
of levels. It works.
when you see now, when I come at you, don't be like, oh, why are you picking on me now?
Levels to
I
it.
see people are in the chat are talking about glad I don't live in the Bay Area because it was hot. It's been hot here in Mexico, different kind of hot. We don't have AC, and one great thing about living here is that your power always gets shut off. So I woke up today with no water. I still don't have any water, and my power was shut off. So by the will of Allah, the power is on, and hopefully we can get through this show. And it's really humid. So if you start seeing me perspire, it's because if I turn a fan on, I won't be able to hear. And I'm scared if too many things are on at the same time, the city is going to go, "Who is the gringo?" And then it's going to shut off a bit earlier today. So,
Shouldn't you be dressed like Matt?
Yep.
if only you saw what I had on earlier.
Freaking tank top, everybody.
Like, Matt is overdressed for what I had on earlier.
Oh God.
Is there a shirt policy on YouTube?
Yeah,
You've
You
been
can
working
show
on
this. I watched
YouTube for
I've been
years.
watching these like workout videos, and so I've been seeing steroid nipples. So you're fine. Those long ones that look like an aardvark snout. You know they've been totally juicing.
3 button
what was that?
minimum for the TIR show stuff.
Oh yeah. You got to have
Let it
all this
flow.
showing.
Pascal is demure.
I'm watching all the left reckoning guys with their glasses. I'm like, yo, with all the brown liquor, boy.
Man, there's a lot of we were talking about before. There's a lot to celebrate today. We got football back, Bernie Sanders' birthday, and the Queen's gone. So good times all around, y'all. I mean, we
I
don't usually
forgot
get to report on good news.
I forgot to mention the Queen. So yeah, the Rams are playing the Bills, which is kind of a that
And the
should have
Bills
been
are
a Super
kicking the
Bowl.
Rams' ass right now. They might
The
change.
Bills are
Oh,
beating their
shit.
asses.
Is the defense doing well? Because I swapped them out. I mean,
Are you serious, Matt?
I was afraid, and so I
Oh my
I-
god! I was just teasing you about the Bills' defense.
no. Well, somebody I was listening to a podcast
Don't listen to those
and they
people.
weren't
Dude.
happy.
Don't listen to those people. You know who you should
That's all
listen
I
to?
got.
Beyond the Red Zone the leftist sports show on This Is Revolution, where we had a 25-minute discussion on Josh Allen's throwing mechanics and how they got better through coaching. But we're not talking about football right this minute. We are talking about current events, but not really current events, but current events. And we always end with Matt. But today, let's start with Matt. Matt is in the starting position. Matt, you want to discuss Wall Street's return to a more puritanical, or should I say rise and grind mindset that was lost to a generation of more pampered employees that believe in working less and playing more, ergonomic workspaces with micro kitchens on every floor, video games in the break room. That's going to change soon. Well, I'm just talking about my time in tech.
That's what it seemed like it was always going to be. I remember if you passed the super genius Google test for like orthogonal thinking, you could, play ping pong at your lunch. I got this to share here. You can put this up. This is an article in New York Post by a guy named Charles Gasparino.
Blowhard du jour.
Yeah, so let's talk about Charles. I want to puff him up a little bit. This guy's used to be at Newsweek, and then he was at CNBC, and then he was at Fox Business. Some people might mark a bit of a downhill trend there, but nonetheless, this guy has business sources. He talks to CEOs and shit, right? And not to give him too much credit, there's a funny part of his biography where Gasparino said that he was submitted for the Pulitzer Prize, and as if he was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, but those are two separate things. And he was just submitted for, as thousands and thousands of journalists are, but he had to correct that. So this is the guy we're talking about. But he has this interesting article, and I'll read a little bit of this here. The most coddled generation that Wall Street has ever encountered is about to find out what it means to really go to work. That is the word coming from C-suites of the big banks, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs. The CEOs of these firms made their bones back in the day when the price paid for a lucrative career on Wall Street was long hours while being screamed at by your boss. I think there's a lot of other like externalities. I never worked on Wall Street, but I did work with a guy along with Michael Brooks, Phil McKenzie, who worked at Goldman Sachs, and a little alcoholism, a lot of what people call maybe a toxic work environment. But anyway, now they want to turn. What's that?
Cocaine.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Whenever there's quick money, there's always going to be hookers and cocaine.
Right. Now they want to turn back the clock, even if that means getting on the wrong side of the influx of pampered millennials and Gen Zers whom they needed to hire during the long bull market. They won't say this publicly, of course, but they're secretly welcoming the looming economic, I think that must be like a recession, and Wall Street deal-making slowdown as a way to reassert control over the woke masses. This is something we talked about a little bit last week too. The stock market and deal-making boom extended incredible leverage to a class of Wall Street employees brainwashed by woke college professors and administrators into believing any and all of their feelings are important and existential, including not wanting to work so hard. Wall Street, despite its Darwinian rep, succumbed to pressure, transforming itself into something like a college safe space because it needed entry and associate level bodies to process deals and trades, and faced competition for talent from big tech. What I just find interesting about this is the entire mapping of this whole like anti-CRT or anti-woke onto a problem of labor discipline, right? Like these guys like working from home because they got used to that during the pandemic, and that's simply what this is. There's I'm sure plenty of people who love working from home that have pretty horrible views on like different categories of wokeness or whatever, right? That meant more perks for grunts and business. Grunts of the business, think stuff like free Pelotons on top of higher pay, flexible work hours, and demands to work from home well after the worst of the COVID pandemic subsided. And this is where I get a little bit fixated on the COVID element of this. Like, I understand the general, wanting to be done with. I've done traveling. I've, gone to public events. I've gone to movie theaters. stuff like that. Like I'm ready to live a normal-ish life, right? But I think you have to really pump the brakes when you see the downplayed of the situation we're still undergoing, where people are still getting sick with this. We don't know what the long-term effects of it are.
Mhm.
And we're removing New York, for instance, just said, okay, we don't need to wear them in the subway because people haven't been wearing them in the subway and we don't want to enforce it. And look, I don't know what the right thing is. I would probably argue for, mask requirements and such tied to case increases and stuff like that. But taking COVID seriously is not something that bosses want. It also meant accepting. Let me just continue here, and there's one more. It also meant accepting the mores of a new generation, even if it meant lower productivity. Wall Street execs used to brag that they slept in their office under their desk when big deals were on the line. Now the up and comers embrace something known as quiet quitting, where doing the bare minimum is the norm. How's that for Wall Street grunt work? I mean, do you guys have any thoughts on quiet quitting before I go any further?
I just want to say that I came across an article about quiet firing. So
How does
Yeah,
that
what-
work?
equal and opposite.
Could you
huh?
remind us, Toussaint, what that was? Because that was something else.
Quiet firing was you're sort of being edged out of a promotion, you're kept out of meetings, and slowly just kind of moved out of the job.
Mm.
I
It's
feel like
just
that's more
like-
common than people think.
Well,
Oh yeah.
but even that, like, it's just like, are we unable to communicate anymore as a society? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, what is this? Is this a new concept? Is this a new thing? Or this is something that's been going on for a very long time where, like, your bosses are sort of like pegging you down? It's like, new trend in America, quiet firing, or new trend in America, quiet quitting, which is way stupider, by the way, because quiet quitting is like, oh, you do your job and you do what's asked of you and then you go home at the end of the day, like as if that's some kind of super dangerous, worrisome thing. I mean, I just, when you see things like this, at least for me, and maybe I'm just having a little Hank Hill moment, all of these motherfuckers spend too much time online. Like, it's just like, you gotta fucking back up a little bit. Like, if there is something happening in the economy that's worth talking about,
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear it, even if it disagrees with my views. But like, anyway, I know this wasn't the point of the segment, but like the whole quiet quitting, the quiet firing shit is just so
Yeah.
exhausting to me because it's meaningless, just jargon words thrown into things.
It's sort of like a bed. It's sort of like a bedtime story they're telling themselves instead of just acknowledging that your employees don't fuck with you anymore. Like people used to bend over backwards for like a Wall Street job or even a fucking tech job, and now it's like fuck you. Like I don't like going to work for Google back in like 2006 was like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Like exciting and appealing, and you would do whatever. Like, yeah, you would sleep under your desk or whatever. But just to wrap this up, this is the COVID minimizing here. With power shifting to management, last week Solomon began forcing all employees back to the office 5 days a week after Labor Day. The Post's Lydia Moynihan was first to report a company-wide memo cited significantly less risk of severe illness, while a spokeswoman cited the need to preserve the firm's client-centric business, which is corporatees for get your rear ends to work because you're less productive on Zoom. Now, I'm not sure about like the claims about productivity. That's not really my concern, but I do know that like, look, there is. I mean, we'll find out if we get more surges. What about severity of illness? People are still going to hospital with it. Maybe not to the extent at the start of the pandemic. A lot of people are vaccinated and things like that, but you don't know about the long-term effects of these things either. And the truth is, I think it's just an absolute sort of civilizational missed opportunity that we've exited this pandemic arguing whether or not the government did too much, when in fact we've gone through it without extending universal health care to every single American,
Yeah.
which completely undercuts like whether vaccines are scary. Okay, you have any complications, you're covered for life with that same healthcare system, right? Like we've been sort of, our eyes have been taken off the ball there. And just to wrap up, as I first reported, Morgan Stanley's head of HR issued a similar memo at the same time saying the firm is lifting its COVID protocols, i.e. testing and contact tracing. They don't want you to know if you're sick. if it's not so harmful, you might still want to know in case you have some sort of effect. I know somebody who's all of a sudden allergic to cats and was not before they were before they had COVID. And Eric Osgood, Dr. Eric Osgood, we talked to on Left Reckoning for patrons. That's the thing that's happening. So like, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's better than being dead. It's not dying, but that sucks, right? And you should know if that happened at work because your boss forced you back to work. And yeah, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
I mean, I don't know we have other things to get to, but like jumping on that, like, the thing that's so frustrating about that whole framing the argument is like these coddled millennial workers, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm here for all working people, I will say, but it takes a little bit for me to get worked up about the Wall Street workers. So don't get me wrong there. But like the reason they get the ping pong tables and the barista and all that bullshit is because the expectation is that you need to live at work, like you need to live at the office, which is like to like the owners and the bosses gain who are making way more money off of those people's work than the people who are working are getting, and like to then and like it's a bad deal is what I'm saying. Like the perks, the free lunches, the free dinners.
Look, David, you say that now, but have you ever been in an office that had a blue bottle coffee?
No, I certainly have not.
Have you ever been in an office where there were two lovely ladies that made you fruit and veggie smoothies on demand?
But like, the thing is like the point is like obviously that's nice workplace stuff, and like again, it's like this is not what I'm shedding my tears about. But like again, like saying it's like, oh, this generation of people is so soft and they're like expecting so much instead of it being a very, very baseline decision by those people who own the company, who are saying it's cheaper for us to find a way to make sure that these people are here 10, 12 hours a day and make them not complain about it by giving them all these kind of perks than it would be to pay them properly for what they're doing.
But David, have you ever heard those people complain that there's not enough LaCroix in the free LaCroix walk-in?
That would probably be something that would push my limits, if I'm being honest.
You got to hear that. Or that, what the hell? Where is... Each floor had different... what do you call that water where you infuse it? Each floor had different infused water in the tank. So you know how you just go get water, you fill up the water cooler, but each water cooler had different... like this is kiwi, strawberry, sage, whatever, infused water. And then you hear the complaints like, dude, why can't they have the cucumber pineapple?
Or asparagus water, right?
These are the complaints, David, that you need to hear in real life.
I mean, I think that the one thing that needs to be considered is that Charlie Gasparino is a complete and total Wall Street apologist prick. As you watch his shtick on Fox News, I mean, I'm familiar with this guy for years. This is a guy who was cheering on Eric Adams because Eric Adams was like, yeah, we don't need to make any deals with these broke progressives. We need to cheer on Wall Street. I'm not a fan of Gasparino at all. I've been watching this guy for years. He's a complete tool and a total apologist for the worst abuses of the financial services industry.
Yeah, the things people are saying about the things that you see in some of these places. There was a place in Square. It was this weird room that I was like, do you guys take kids here? Because this is really weird. It had like a Nintendo 64, random music instruments. I was like, what the fuck goes on over here? And why is this over the women's gym? Strange.
Man, I think there's a whole bunch of people who, I mean, my brother works for a engineering company, got used to how nice it is to like, you're done with work and you're at home already. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I know I personally like, it's part of it for Majority Report is nice to like, you have the in-person sort of interplay. And that's definitely like helpful for this thing like this. But also, I really liked being able to have like a video game on in the corner of the room and be playing like, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot while the interview.
But I mean, I think you're hitting on something though, that like, I'll just say that like, I'm not super hot on like a permanent situation of like work from home, particularly because like that's like a way to offset costs on like people. You know, like you have to turn one room in your house into an office. Like,
Right.
that's like like for us, obviously, Matt and I have like our room set up for our show, so it's like works. But like for other people, I know that's a real struggle. But I think that like the point here is that like people really experience what it's like to not have somebody breathing down your neck when you're working, and like that freedom. And like I definitely get why people don't want to come back to the offices and return to a place where, you know, you're having some person trying to impose their idea of what it means to be working on you versus what you're able to do at home without that kind of supervision.
Oh, and it's huge for parents.
Yeah.
My son's
Yeah.
mom still works from home, and at this point, she kind of prefers it because it enables her to, you know, deal with our son, pick him up if she needs to, and the days where he's staying with her mom who lives downstairs from her, it's just, you know, it's so nice to be able to be around your kid and not have to see your kid in increments. So I can see why parents love it, but I also understand why, and I'm not saying I agree with it, why they're starting to pay people a little bit less that want to work from home. It's like, oh, you want to work from home? Cool, we're going to pay you a little bit less.
Totally
For no
right.
other
Then you
reason you can.
You have the competition issue that's going to creep in too. Like, well, I'm going to hire from wherever I want then, and adds an entire new layer of competition to who can take those
That
jobs.
is also happening as well. You know, a pool of people that's kind of global. We haven't seen it all the way yet, but I mean, I think it's going to go the way that IT has been going for years without having to get an H-1B visa. So it's going to be you just wait and see. Big David is either a magician or the deep state got him.
Deep state.
Or
Elon probably sent the cops over.
Did you get
They
swatted?
heard you,
I didn't
David.
mean to scare you. No, my if people could see the setup I have though here, they would laugh their asses off because it's very insane. Anyway, it's not worth it. But like the T-shirt that I have over my light, so it's not too bright, came off, so I had to put it back.
Oh, okay. Because it looked like
I'm moving my hands too much.
like Elian Gonzalez style, like they came in with the guns. Speaking of Elian Gonzalez, Pascal Robert, how are you?
I'm fine.
Wow.
We coming for you, nigga.
You want to talk about, before you even talk about what you want to talk about, you and I were guests on a show yesterday.
Correct.
You
Oh,
wanna-
yeah, that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The thing I did. I know you're a superstar and you do so much press, but can you talk a bit about the press that you did yesterday?
Yesterday we were on a show called the Generational. What was the podcast?
Generational Change.
Generational Change. It was sponsored by a woman who actually ran for Congress against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida in Broward County. And it was a relatively interesting podcast I had never heard of. They invited us on the show just to talk about what we do at This Is Revolution podcast. And it was an interesting conversation. They were friendly, very friendly, and they were much more supportive of the kind of socialist Bernie Sanders kind of politics that I would have thought. At first, I thought they were going to be kind of more straight libs, but they were a little bit more left than I really, really, really expected. And I was really glad to see a podcast rooted in South Florida politics that was embracing the kind of more left progressive message. So it was a good connect.
So check that out. Generational Change. We were on there. It was more Pascal. They really wanted Pascal. That's what happens. They
wanted me to talk about black politics a little bit.
Yeah, they hit me up. I don't know if this happens to David or Matt, but they hit me up to try to get to Pascal. They're like, hey Jason, you're a good guy, but we really want Pascal.
Anyway,
can you tell him that we said hi? I don't know if that happens to either one of you guys, but it definitely happens to me way too much. There's a water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, Pascal. It's leaving many residents without water, something I'm dealing with right now. A Democratic city with, would you say their mayor is socialist, or does he say he's a Democrat at this point?
I think he's a Democrat. I think he considers himself left. Chokwe Lumumba was marketing himself to be the most radical mayor in the United States when he ran in the earlier aughts. But what's fascinating is that in a Republican state like Mississippi, where he's being forced to have to deal with a major water crisis that's not totally of his doing at all. The machine of the Republican state is not cooperating at all in any way with having to help him get water to his people. The crisis that hit Jackson, Mississippi highlights the fragility of a water system across the country that will be increasingly vulnerable to the effects of climate change in the coming years. As rainfall of historic proportions flooded Mississippi's Pearl River, a key pump at the O.B. Curtis Water Treatment Plant, which provides the capital city with its drinking water, was unable to causing a severe drop in water pressure. Some 150,000 residents were left without safe drinking water, although water pressure has been restored. A boil water notice remains in effect. So up until this point, over 150,000 Jackson residents are still without water. And recently, the governor of Mississippi said that Jackson, Mississippi, and Chokwe Lumumba, the city's black mayor, had not yet did a budget on how to fix the necessary repairs. Now, my question is that why exactly is the full burden left to the mayor of this small city that does not have a large tax base? This is a small municipal city with a large black poor population. Why is it his absolute prerogative to have to be able to be the one to come up with the full budget on how to fix this major municipal water pipeline in a city that is, starving for a tax base? And again, what this shows to me is that for us as progressives who are worried about whether or not we have a political future or viability, how exactly does this demonstrate a meshing of one, a Democratic Party black political class elected official dealing with the infrastructure of an existing already stayed black political class mechanism that's not rooted to the progressive branch of the Democratic Party? How does that happen in the South when he has to confront with a Republican administration who's the governor, who's already viewing him as too radical, as viewing him as too left of pale for his governance, when a crisis comes about and he needs dependent on that state infrastructure to help his citizens? So for us who are looking at political options for left political candidates in states, particularly in the South, not in these blue states, how are we going to negotiate these kinds of circumstances where we may have a victory, where we have a progressive mayor or municipal administrator in the city, and there's a state service that requires a red state administrator to dole out to that administrator, but he's not willing to play ball because he views our guy as being too beyond the pale? So I wanted to bring up this situation with Jackson, Mississippi, and Chokwe Lumumba as kind of a bellwether to what the progressive forces in red states may have to deal with in the future when dealing with situations where we actually have victories politically in small locations, but actually the largest surrounding state area is governing by red state politics.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because when we were on the show yesterday, I was having connection issues and I came back in and you were gone. They brought me back on the show. But, their whole thing was kind of rooted in, if we get the right progressive in office, then we can win the fight. And what's interesting to me about Jackson is Jackson actually does have a movement. We always talk about movements. Cooperation Jackson.
Right.
Which we've had, now I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Kali Akuno.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kali, I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me. That's all I need is Kali Akuno getting mad at me, cussing me out. But they actually have a real deal people-powered movement. But from my understanding, the tax base pretty much all left. So you have a majority renting, non-existent tax base. But even then, this water problem with the infrastructure is generations old. It's not a brand new thing.
Correct.
And it's worth noting too that they had a similar crisis in 21. They had a similar failure. So it's not even something that came out of nowhere. And before this crisis, Jackson was on a boil water notice since July. So they were already having water crisis. And I think there's videos of Chokwe Lumumba saying that it's not a question of if, but when this system is going to fail. I mean, there's so much I think to get into with that crisis. I mean, we did on Left Reckoning on Tuesday, and we'll probably clip it as its own thing. I did a little segment I think it's important to remember. I don't think this is necessarily not unique to other red states, but I think it's important to understand the way that the dominant conservative forces in the South have run those systems for so long. I don't know how familiar y'all are with the Redeemers, but that was like a movement, movement post Reconstruction after the radical Republicans got sort of pushed out in a lot of parts of the South. You have these Redeemers, and it's important to remember that it wasn't the planter class, right, the ex-slave owning people coming back into power, but actually a still white supremacist, still with all that baggage, don't get me wrong, but like an upper middle class pro-industrial force that ended up taking power in the South. And they used and viewed state government as a great place to pillage and pilfer, and particularly federal money that was going to rebuild the South. And like when you look at what's going on in Mississippi, where like Brett Favre, for example, I don't know if y'all saw this,
78 million. Was that what it was?
not to him totally, but that's the total amount of money that was wasted. Like he got something like $1 million to give a speech at a high school inspiring kids instead of feeding people, right? With like effectively food stamps. And I shouldn't laugh at it. It's just like so insane and ridiculous. But you have to remember, like those Southern governors, like that's how they view the state, is like, how can we find a way to open up opportunities for private investment? And it's like no surprise, I think, that Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, has been out here saying like, this is a great argument for why we should privatize the water system, in Mississippi.
Exactly. So neoliberalism becomes the answer for the solution to a problem as part of the consequence of the state unwilling to fulfill its mandate. It's perverse.
And I'm really curious about your thoughts on this, Pascal. But like, I think that like there's a part of this where it's like I think like fighting these local fights is really worthwhile. But like, I think we got to remember the avenues or the arenas that we're fighting is like state governments and local governments. They just do not have the budgets that are necessary to do like that has to come from the federal government. Frankly,
there's a strong argument that the federal government should be involved in this. I think that they should be, whether it's through FEMA or whatever, in some way.
Yep. It's a capital city of a state.
And like, but let's also not forget, like, we're not just talking about federal funding, like federal guidance and control, I think, of a lot of these things. Agree. Because there's federal money that the state government of Mississippi is using, again, to pay Brett Favre or to squander that was supposed to go to, like, revitalizing the water system. It can't just be, like, an earmarked thing. Like, there actually has to be, like, we have a what? And I think, like, I like the way you frame the segment because, like, a lot of times, I don't know. As a Southerner, I get frustrated whenever something bad happens in the South. It's like, well, it's the South. Everyone's stupid there, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you got to understand, one, the conflicts that are going on there. And two, like when it comes to water infrastructure, that's like a national crisis. That's happening everywhere. Right. The lack of investment. It gets worse in a place like Jackson, Mississippi, where you have all of those other motherfuckers on top of it who are aggravating the problem. But like New York, Washington, D.C. are just cities that I know off the top of my head that I've been reading very worrying, studies and warnings from like people in like the water industry saying this shit's been underinvested in for a long time, and like we are very close to some potential critical failure there.
Well, Pascal, how do you feel about people that say it's a racial issue, that this happens because it's a majority black city?
I think it has. It's more of a class and poverty issue. It's a poor black city that has no tax base. The black middle class is fleeing from Jackson, Mississippi faster than the white middle class. So I would argue that race is not a non-factor, but class is a bigger factor in that the actual economic viability of the city is not happening. I think that if this was, say, PG County or an upper middle class black constituency, there'd be more willingness for people to pay attention to what is going on. I think that class and race have a confluence here where it's not just a racial issue, it's a class issue as well, more so than anything else.
Did you want to add something to that, David or Matt?
I mean, I just want to say people should read the Clarion Ledger piece Pascal shared. Jackson Mayor defends record day after governor and said city has no plan to fix water system, because it's one of the more clarifying ones where it's just him showing receipts of requests that he sent to different public representatives that he didn't get a reply from. But at the way end, there's this response from Congress, as Congressman Benny Thompson has said, the city has not presented any real plan that leads out of the water crisis that the state or federal government could consider funding. We look forward to working to address the long-term challenges. Basically, they're saying like it's not sufficient, but they never got back to the mayor to say what exactly was insufficient about it, which I would say would be the next step. And so they're just getting the brush off there, and it's pretty incredible to see the intransigence and just the running the same playbook like by Tate Reeves of this is just an irresponsible city that can't get its affairs in order, and
Yeah.
and they and like all this focus on like whether they're at whether they're at the same press conferences or not. And well, they got pictured at a press conference that didn't really solve much of the issues. So
Well, I do believe that there's a racial component. I think that the governor of the state understands that the perception of Jackson, Mississippi, as this kind of rebel, radical, socialist, black, left, revolutionary state is good for marketing them as being ungovernable.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, that's like that's the implicit thing. And like, like Chokwe Lumumba, I think you give him a lot of credit for how he's handled this. I know that, like, from what I know, and y'all seem to know people in the Jackson and Cooperative Jackson more than I do, there's been frustrations with him from that movement of like
Right.
him not being rooted enough. So I think I don't know. I feel like Cooperative Jackson, Cooperation Jackson is like one of those things I think a lot of people on the left know about, but don't know much about, if you get what I mean. Like, they know the name.
Right.
I think it's important to like put that out there too when we're talking about somebody movement based versus somebody movement adjacent. I give him a lot of credit for like handling this, and he's been very clear. He's like, we've been warning y'all about this shit for a long ass time, and there hasn't been any kind of serious state investment. So coming at me now when we don't have water function, a system not only that can deliver clean water, but as you were saying, like the pumps aren't working to even pump in like dirty water to people. Like saying like, well, what's your plan to fix that now? Is like, well, I've been warning you about this, motherfuckers, for like a long ass time. I think there's certainly the reality that they're setting them up to fail, and I totally agree too that like I think it's important to like there's no doubt about it in my mind that there's a very clear racial dynamic here. But if you don't recognize the class and the capitalist interest in creating this crisis, then it's just like, well, can we fix the hearts of a bunch of Mississippi legislators and senators? You know what I mean? Versus like building a popular movement that is able to say, y'all motherfuckers have like a very vested interest in like our suffering. And we need to, challenge the business interests that y'all have that are leading y'all to underfund these things purposefully.
Did you want to talk a bit about Cooperation Jackson, Pascal?
Well, Cooperative Jackson is the radical socialist movement that has been part of trying to reestablish a cooperative economic model in Jackson, Mississippi, led by Kali Akuno, that it goes back to the Republic of New Africa movement that comes out in the late 1960s. I mean, it's definitely a radical movement. It's a way to try to reinvest economy into creating a kind of a black economic model of economic independence around a socialist paradigm. And I agree with a lot of it. Some of it I might disagree with, but I think what is good about them is that it's a working class business, a political model that incorporates the governance in actually winning the municipal politics as a means of incorporating into solutions for the people, and not simply just protesting without actually trying to get a kind of political result.
I have to admit, I never really see him protest, to be honest.
No, they're an impressive grassroots movement.
Yeah, rarely do I even see them, protest. But because I think they are somewhat effective, the coverage they get, sadly, is not that broad. Maybe they get at best a Democracy Now! Coverage, but sadly, maybe we should get Kali back on.
We should. As a matter of fact, I was going to talk to you about that. We can see if we can get him back on and talk about this program.
Yeah, let's get Kali back on. You know what we should do with this show? We should have at least one guest for something like that. Like when we do something like that, we should do Kali Akuno, because that way when Matt asks a good smart guy question, he could cut that and then bam, left reckoning. And that is thinking like a comrade.
Can I just say one quick thing about the water? Because I'm seeing things in the chat about water and setting up filters. I totally get a lot of parts of this country. People don't trust their water system, and I'm not telling you you're wrong. But I think it's important to like direct your anger in a certain direction on these things.
Yeah.
because like there's a whole industry that's been set up to be like public water by its very nature is dangerous and bad. And I think that's a very dangerous thing for us to accept as leftists and even just as consumers in the most broadest sense, that like, no, the water you drink should be clean. Like I drink the water here happily. I know a lot of people, feel like they need to filter everything. And again, it's just like, we should just be able to demand that like the water that comes out of your faucet is like safe and healthy to drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And there's a whole industry out there that's set up to try to make it seem like even the best water systems that we have in this country are unsafe to drink. And I think it's important not to fall into that trap of necessary. Not, you know what I'm trying to say? It's like, I'm not saying it doesn't exist where there are bad water systems in this country, but I'm also saying that you shouldn't just take that as a given that water systems that are publicly controlled are bad and dangerous.
Like as I was saying before we came on air, my municipal water that my house is tied to literally shut off since I've been up this morning, and we don't get a warning. You don't know why. There's no. You can call a number if you want to, but no one's going to answer it. And I cannot drink the water, and sometimes it does smell funny when it comes out of the faucet. So when I go back to the States and I see like people drink out of the water out of the sink or something, I'm always like, oh yeah, I crossed the imaginary line. Now the water's supposed to be okay.
Supposed to be.
So
My water was brown today.
what did I ever tell you about the time I had to take brown showers in the Gulf of Mexico because the septic mixed in with the regular water?
Those words should not go together.
Wait, Tucson, your water was brown in New York today?
Yes, it was brown in New York. Sometimes it's brown,
Scary.
particularly
Like,
in the morning.
is doo-doo or is it rust?
It's
doo-doo,
like
baby.
John King beige,
John
Var
King.
beige. Yeah.
That.
See.
So what did you do? Did you be like, were you like, this is wrong, or did you just boil it?
No, I was filling up my Brita filter, and I was like, not a commercial. Sorry, we're not sponsored. I was filling up my filter, and the filter's white, and you can see that, hey, this water is not clear. So I just dumped it all out. I let the water run. It still didn't look clear, so I waited a few hours.
Oh,
Yeah.
fuck that noise.
Yeah.
Fuck that noise. But,
Everybody
you'd
dealing
be
with
surprised
that?
what you get used to. Right now, I'm just like, oh, throw some bleach in there. You're fine.
Yeah. That's what Tyler Cowen wants us to think like.
Maybe you shit your brains out if it touches your lips, but you're fine. That rash will go away in no time. Quit crying. With all your crying. But I do want to, I'm going to have to step away for a second. But David, recently on this show, we discussed abortion. We did a whole show on it Tuesday, where I did have my almost fatal falling accident, which Toussaint saved the show as I was disconnected and screaming for help from the floor.
Granddad broke his pelvis. It wasn't even in the shower.
I
Terrible.
shouldn't even lean over anymore.
No, you shouldn't. Sit up straight.
That was the funniest show that we've done in a while. But David, in all seriousness,
Yeah.
looks like Texas is joining Kansas as another red state that is opposed to an outright abortion ban. Please talk about the Lone Star State.
Yeah, I mean,
Tell us why the Lone Star State is looking to go the same route as Kansas, as saying, no, we don't want this ban.
well, I wouldn't go this far because we don't have the same abilities to do those kind of statewide referendums on these things. But, we could also title this segment if we were to clip it. David's right about a lot of things. I've been saying this for a while to folks. I don't know if it's handy to share it. I don't need it to be up. I can just read it out. But I've been talking a lot about after the initial abortion ban, before the Supreme Court ruling, that, this is one of those things where it's like the GOP is very happy to legislate outside of what is popular, even with Texans, like the people as a whole in this state. And I think it's a very important thing for us to remember as we're trying to build popular movements. just really quick, if people want to read this, you can find it in the Texas Signal. A new poll shows Texas's abortion ban is unpopular. According to a recent poll by Perry Undem, which surveyed around 2,000 voters across various demographics, 60% of Texans believe abortion should be available in all or most cases, with only 11% of Texans wanting abortion banned in all cases. And as an addition to that, 9 out of 10 people surveyed also agree that Texas politicians are out of touch with their electorate. And I bring this up, and I think this is an important story for people to remember, that particularly on things like abortion and a lot of these social issues that we see a lot of politics about, this country actually does lean one way on most of these things. And in Texas, like, I always say, like, there's a fight about when they think it should be legal or not, right? Which is a fight that's worth having. But I think it's very important to remember in a state like Texas, where it's effectively banned across the board now, that this is extremely unpopular. That when you talk to somebody at the supermarket, when you see somebody out in public, the vast majority of those people don't want the laws that are put in place. And there's a few things I think are important here. There's one, the political aspect, right? Where we can say, well, abortion rights are popular even in a place like Texas, that I think people from outside the state might have a view of Texans that they might think that Texans are very much against this, which is inaccurate and untrue. And I've been saying that even before this poll came out. And two, the really frightening thing for me as a Texan has been how willing the GOP in Texas has been to govern from unpopular positions. Like, I could deal with it in a sense where, I mean, not deal with it, it wouldn't make me happy, don't get me wrong. But like, if this was like, oh, I'm in a state where the popular will is one way or the other on this question, and like we have to find a way to like win the people over on these questions, right? That'd be one thing. But the reality is that it's less the people here wanting something and more the political establishment that runs this state wanting something very, very different and very happy to placate about 10% of the population. Like, you have to remember, in Texas, a state that is so thoroughly run by the Republican Party, that the electorate here is not just small in the sense of the people that are voting, the electorate in the sense of like the people who are in government are thinking like, who is our base or the people we're going to listen to, is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, right? The people who vote in the Republican Party in Texas, the Republican primaries in Texas, are not reflective of like the vast majority of Texans, but because the Democratic Party here has just been in shambles for decades now, right? I mean, like, really, like, it's amazing to see, even compared to other red states, how weak the Democratic Party has been in Texas for so long. That like there's a very, very small base of Texans who are sort of being answered to and listened to and reflected in government policy here. And that's important for like a few different reasons. One, I think it's important on the national level to remind folks about what people are like here, because sometimes I do get frustrated at the way Texans are portrayed. And two, and most importantly, for fighting these fights, is remembering the fact that there is like popular mandate and popular will of opposition to a lot of these things. And the tension is not as much convincing Texans that like abortion should be something that's available to people. It's providing a vehicle that people find is viable for being able to put those things into practice. You know, Texas, the cliche about Texas is a non-voting state, which is very true. We have very low voter participation. And, you know, the way a lot of liberals talk about it is like, well, everyone's too stupid and they don't realize that doing this or that is important to them. But I would argue that when you're going up against a force like the Texas GOP, which is not only preventing people from accessing healthcare, is passing extremely unpopular gun laws, is overseeing a grid that literally is failing and led to the death of nearly 1,000 Texans in Winter Storm Uri, that like we need to be able to speak the language of popular democracy again, because there's an audience for it and there's an electorate for it, and it's something that the Texas Democratic Party has like not really been able to do. I think it's important on the national level too, as you know, Jason, like when we're talking about Kansas and when we're talking about these red states, that, you know, the media does a lot of work creating an image of people for you. that is not reflective of the people. And as organizers, especially people who are trying to organize outside of the Democratic Party, I think it's really important to realize where people stand. Because I think the American working class is far more progressive than even a lot of socialists give them credit for on a lot of these social issues. And I think we need to be very confident in like running on it and pushing it forward. I mean, the fact that 9 out of 10 Texans in this poll are saying they don't think that Texan politicians are reflective of the values of Texas people, I think should be a very good argument that there's a lot of opportunity to build, alternatives to the system. And I just say to my fellow Texans and people who might be listening to this podcast, like, it should worry you. Not that I have kind of glittering eyes about the state of American democracy, but when you see a state government that is so willing to legislate from a minoritarian, I always struggle with that word, minoritarian position on these things, I think on the left, we need to be very, very comfortable with reclaiming a language of democracy on these questions, because those are the conversations that I think more people are having than you think in places like this, about how this doesn't represent us. This is not what I want. And I think it gives us a huge opportunity, not just for, fellas like Robert O'Rourke, or as people know him, Beto, to try to win himself a nice position. But for those of us who really want to see a real working class alternative in this state like Texas, to feel the little bit of confidence that we can build it.
Well, let me ask a question to the panel that we kind of spoke about a little bit beforehand off air. Do you think abortion is going to be an issue that reignites a voting base for this primary election that maybe can get not just some wins and keep some districts that might be in lieu of losing out to a GOP candidate, but do you think this can actually be I would say Bernie Trump 2016 level moment where there's so much activation around this that we can actually start building a movement and maybe getting some wins? What do you guys think?
I don't know if it's going to be that deep of a reverberation politically that you're going to turn it into a movement, but I think that it will have some political effect in midterm elections, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been pretty evident so far. Just the way, like Blake Masters, for instance, or Jensen in Minnesota, all these different Republicans that took maximalist, I'll ban it, ban abortion, ban the hell out of it. A few months ago, prior to the striking of Roe, are now, the exceptions masters, and they're dishing out exceptions left and right. They can't grant more exceptions for abortions. And I think, I don't know if it's going to be enough to save Democrats. The JD Vance is really where it comes down to. If it sinks JD Vance, I mean, one, it'll be a massive victory for, I think reproductive health, but also probably the funniest outcome to midterm elections if both the Peter Thiel's guys go down. But I also want to bring in South Dakota to this, because a similar thing going on, not as stark as maybe David's, but still a very small husk of folks that wants complete ban of abortion. South Dakota actually has a trigger law that doesn't have rape and incest exceptions. Despite this, it's over 3/4 that want abortion allowed legally with these exceptions, and 2/3, 65%, want to go to a referendum to try to change that. So people are animated to try to get out and vote for this stuff, even in places like South Dakota. In North Dakota, I'm a little bit less clear. There were running a candidate against Kelly Armstrong, I believe, is a representative from North Dakota, and the guy is pro-life, and the members of the party revolted against him. And looking from the outside, I think they were right to. I think you can't be running a pro-life Democrat in elections like this, not least of which because
anywhere.
Exactly. And it's like the guy, like he's like, I put a lot of like work in this party. It's like, I'm sure you're a nice guy. Like, you're not gonna you have no fucking chance to win this thing anyway, bro. So it's like, step aside and let's not have a pro-life Democrat on the ticket.
It's tough. I think on Left Reckoning we're gonna do. I'll just be honest. I don't like to put on my pundit hat because like I'm not very personally invested in the success of the Democratic Party. I want working class candidates and socialist candidates to be winning. I will say though that I would prefer, if I'm being honest, Beto to be in the governor's chair versus Abbott, who I think is just a complete psychopath.
Sure.
But like, just since we were talking about Texas, like everyone's always asking my takes on this. It's like, I'll just say for me personally, like, I don't know if y'all saw the clip of him up in North Texas recently, where somebody was laughing at him for talking about AR-15s. And how that was
He
like
called him a motherfucker or
he
something.
called him a motherfucker. And I'll admit, just putting all my cards on the table, I'm not a big anti-gun guy like a lot of people on the left, particularly the liberal left, are. I'm very ambivalent about that. But I will say that just like when you're reacting to the insanity and the barbarism that you see on the right on that question, my cheeks got a little red when Beto, cursed at him. But then you have this realization, it's like, that's like it. Like that's the best you get from Beto is like Beto's gonna curse at a time you don't expect him to curse. I don't know if he's got the mobilization behind him to overcome voter apathy in the state, and I also don't think outsiders realize just how much antipathy he generated for himself by running for president. Like I talk to normal people all the time, and they will say to me, I like Beto. I voted for him in the Senate race, but I don't know if I want to vote for him this time because this guy doesn't seem like he's very invested in Texas. Because he immediately ran out and tried to become president. It seems like he's self-serving, wants to become a big political star, right? You can argue with them about those reasons. I'm just saying, like, that's a very common.
They're right.
So, like, I think that like the backlash against abortion is going to be a major factor in a lot of places. I'm not confident enough to say that I think that that's going to be a winning issue, even with the polling on it in Texas, without a vehicle that makes people feel like this is a serious, viable alternative. Because from everything that I'm seeing right now, it looks like at best Beto loses 6 points here. And it sucks, but this is how politics works, is like people do not like voting for a loser, even if they agree with them, and I can't make an impassioned plea for Beto O'Rourke is what I'm saying to folks.
There's some people that would disagree with you.
What?
Reagan would disagree with you.
Nixon would.
Bernie
they'd
would.
disagree with you. Those
About
are some
what?
good winners.
Sorry.
About voting for the losers.
Can you take the L
people,
and keep going?
The marginal people here, the people who are infrequent voters in Texas, if you haven't voted in an election in 12 years, you think you're going to go and vote for somebody who you think is going to lose the election? I don't. I'm sorry, I don't find that to be very convincing. Certainly, you can, get a base. There's a lot of money going to the Beto campaign, and he has very passionate voters. I'm talking about the voters in Texas who are like the skeleton key to Texas politics. Where when you do polling on issues, when you do polling on politics here, Texans sort of go a little bit different from what the Republican majority represents. And it's like that 10 to 15% who feel one way but are non-voters. Those people aren't people who are showing up for somebody they don't think can win.
Is the Obama shtick that Beto and Buttigieg ran on in their 2020 races kind of old hat now, as we've had people like AOC, who I was on the show the other day? I said she's maybe our first ever social media candidate. She really blows up on social media. Donald Trump's been in the American zeitgeist for 40 years. I will never call him a social media candidate. But after something like Trump, because that is such a, that this is the first time someone literally walks off the set and into the Oval Office. There was always a process. You had to be a governor first.
Excuse me?
You had to be a governor first to walk off the set.
Reagan.
So what would a Beto have to do? Because he seems pretty stuck in this antiquated way.
It's interesting because he's doing something that I really like in his campaign, where he's going to every county. Mm-hmm. So he's not saying, I'm just going to do Dallas suburbs, Austin suburbs, Houston suburbs. He's going to like Republican counties and pushing this. to be fair to him, which I shouldn't do, I think that the brand for a lot of people is such a problem that like people have been promised a lot by Democratic Party politicians in Texas for a long ass time, and they don't see the delivery on it. I think it's also very clear to people who the coalition of the Democratic Party is, especially what it's becoming. It's becoming like nice, well-off folks in the suburbs of the major cities, in addition to their traditional base. But there's like, for example, like South Texas is an absolute disaster for the Democrats right now. A part of the state that has always voted solidly Democratic. The Republicans are dropping, thousands, if not millions of dollars into that part of the state to try to flip them. And the Democrats can't do their traditional thing. It's like, well, look, we have the Tejano, like Hispanic person running against somebody else. Like, we got somebody from your community who's been living amongst y'all for a long time. And I haven't seen the Democrats really find a way to answer that strategy. Myra Flores, who y'all might know, is like a really crazy QAnon pro-Trump politician, the first Latina to represent the Rio Grande Valley, by the way, Republican.
No shit.
Which is a real, I think, disaster for the Democratic Party. They let her win because they thought that she would lose once she got redistricted and stuff like that. The guy running against her, another Hispanic Texan, was running like a really wildly racist campaign against her, which only feeds into like the Republican argument that like they don't care about y'all. Y'all have been voting for Democrats for a long ass time, and how much better is your life than it was 20, 30 years ago? For a lot of people, their answer is it's not, right? So like for Beto on his like state campaign, you get what I mean? That like he has an uphill battle, and this is not me being sympathetic. This is just me trying to be honest as a political commentator, where he has to overcome one, the distrust that I think he got from running for president, two, just the general distrust for the Democratic Party that a lot of people have. Both people traditionally vote Republican and people who traditionally vote a Democrat, and a Democratic Party that is just like incapable of speaking class language to folks.
He's a skyscraper, a woke liberal who wants to sound like Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah, I think that's that's a very fair way to put him.
Didn't Beto say that he was going to reunite at the drive-in if he won? And I think that's really what a lot of Gen Xers, younger millennials want to see. They want to see the Beto victory. They want to see the At the Drive-In reunion. They got the Mars Volta new single, but they're like, no, I want more. I need that At the Drive-In.
I think we can definitely move on, but like just to give you an example of what I mean, that like there are multiple Texases right now, because Texas is a state that has had so many people move in recent years. Abbott is running a campaign. Abbott's been governor for a long ass time here. Abbott, if you watch his campaign ads, he is introducing himself to voters because he doesn't have the same national name recognition that Beto has. Like Beto is like people
really.
Oh yeah, I mean, you think somebody who moved here from New Jersey has like as much of an understanding of who Abbott is versus Beto? They might, he's a Republican, I don't like him for this or that, but they might not know that like Abbott, got injured. That's why he's in a wheelchair when he was a young lawyer, and like overcame that. Like Abbott is able to run this campaign, introducing himself to folks in a way that Beto's not. So like there are two Texases right now, right? There's like established Texans, people who are from here, roots here, and then there's this influx of new folks. And the Beto campaign is, I think, is very much more geared to a lot of people like that. Like I was at a party recently and I met somebody and they asked me what I do. I was like, I do politics talking, and they said, well, is Beto going to win? And I was just like, I'm not very confident in it. And they're like, well, I love him. And I was like, yeah, exactly. Like you've been here for, you know what I mean? Like you are exactly who Beto's trying to pull in, this like new group of folks who are moving the state. Like no shade. Like I think that it's very important as somebody who loves this place for Texas always be a very welcoming place to folks who want to be here and be rooted here versus just sort of coming here to take some money and then leave after a couple years. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are some tensions that I just haven't seen them be able to break through. And like, I don't know, like you think Uvalde
there was another shooting there today.
and
Did you see that?
which is like I can't. Sorry, like
Another
talking about that,
mass
like,
shooting in the town.
I'm actually like pretty tough on a lot of things. Like that shit. Like thinking about that again, like really makes me tear up. Uvalde and the abortion ban, you think should be mobilizing things, and I think it's going to have an effect. But the question is if they're going to be able to overcome those other hurdles, which I just haven't seen enough on it. But that's that for now, at least.
I saw that some people were injured. Nobody has perished from what I saw before we went on, and I don't want to say in shock, but David will tell you, Uvalde on that side of the state, it's really small. These are small towns, man.
Yeah.
Like I can't stress how small these towns are. If you've ever driven through America and seen true small town America, Uvalde is kind of one of those places. And to have two so close together events like this is, there's no words I can even think of. Toussaint, do you have anything you'd like to add on that?
Actually, I don't. I have a really hard time with that sort of thing as well.
Pascal, do you want to say any poignant words?
Man, I wish I had more optimism for the way the political wind was going in this country.
Matt, do you have any optimistic words? So we don't go on tear-filled goodbye.
It's all on you.
Oh yeah,
Matt.
it's all going to be great. It's going to be fine. Any day now.
If I could just say, sorry, not to like reopen this again. I'm extremely optimistic about the future of Texas politics. There are really incredible on the ground organizations doing a lot of work. We're seeing a lot of grassroots movements, not just showing up and having an organization and a place to donate to, but winning city elections, winning citywide referendums on certain subjects. There's great groups here doing a lot of ground game work. There's groups like Texas Climate Jobs Project, which is organizing oil and gas workers to fight for a better and greener future. Like there's a lot of good stuff that's happening. So, as bad as it is, I'm not pessimistic necessarily about the future, but I am very damn pessimistic about the Texas Democratic Party, which has just continually fallen on their own face when it comes to coming up against the very frightening right-wing movement in this state.
Before we got on air, because the power had been out for a long time, and here, and luckily it came on not long before we went on air, and my water is still out, and I won't say on air what has been happening, but there's been some also frightening killings. My neighbor and I were reading that there's been over 1,300 murders in Tijuana just this year. It's early September, and apparently there was one person left hanging from a bridge by the border in Tijuana, and they found 6 heads in some bag and some bodies stacked on each other. There's like crazy cartel violence. I read about Memphis. There was a mass shooting in Memphis yesterday. There was a mass stabbing in Canada. I don't know much about that. And then before we went on air, I actually saw about Uvalde. I see that there's some very silly name calling in the chat. We got to let some of that shit go at a certain point, guys, because you can call me whatever name you want to call me. It doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. You're a lib. Okay. Okay. You're going to internet kick my ass? Gives a shit. But let's be better to each other. It's a hug. This is my internet hug to my friends on screen, who I'm going to see sooner than later, and an internet hug to all the people that are watching the show, even the ones that are bickering with each other. I am internet hugging you. Deal with it. Deal with it.
We coming for you, nigga.
And on that note, If you guys haven't done already, please, it helps us out tremendously. Please hit like both channels. Please hit subscribe to both channels. That helps us out more than you know. It doesn't cost you anything. We're going to have a talk about what's going on in Chile with Camilo Gomez, what's going on in Argentina as well. We definitely won't be talking about Mexico because there's nothing to see here. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. These aren't the cartels you're looking for. Thank you guys, and we are out.